Many people probably know about China's Three Gorges hydropower plant. It's a hydropower mega project, which has a capacity of 22.5 gigawatts and at one point managed to produce as much as 112 terawatt hours per year. And besides, have you ever heard of people slowing down the Earth's rotation? Not in the movies, but in real life. Well, Three Gorges Dam, as it turns out, can do just that. And even though it only increased the length of the day by 60 billionths of a second, that's still an incredible achievement for a dam. However, Three Gorges Dam will soon have to give up the top spot in many of the charts. China is currently building another hydropower project in Tibet. It's many times more powerful, and its output would be enough to meet the ends of the whole of the UK. Well, there is one downside. Downstream of this facility lies India and Bangladesh, but they'll hardly get all the tons of energy. Instead, they could face a disaster. Well, let's see what China's come up with this time. On a map, Tibet looks like a high plateau, but in reality, it's the aquatic heart of the continent. Asia's largest rivers are born here: the Huanghe, the Yangtze, the Mekong, the Irrawaddy, the Brahmaputra or the Yarlung Tsangpo, the Salween, the Indus, the Sutlej, and that's just part of the list. In total, more than 10 key rivers originate in the Tibetan Plateau, which has a colossal amount of water resources. The reason lies in geography. There are factors like glaciers, precipitation, and altitude. The average elevation's over 2.5 miles above sea level, which means water tends to flow downhill, and at a rate and pressure that any hydropower engineer would say perfect for a dam. When the ice melts in the summer, the rivers fill to the brim. In winter, they're fed by a constant flow from the mountains. Tibet's essentially a natural water tower. Only instead of concrete tanks, there are glaciers. And instead of pipes, there are mighty rivers on which dozens, if not hundreds, of hydropower plants can be built. All this speaks of the huge hydropower potential of the region. If you need numbers, we've got some. According to some estimates, Tibet could theoretically provide 200 gigawatts of power. To give you an idea of the scale, as of 2022, the installed hydropower capacity of all of China was 415 gigawatts. If you take the U.S., there was 102 gigawatts from hydropower plants there in the same year. In other words, Tibet has twice as much hydropower capacity. Of course, China, with its plans to achieve carbon neutrality, had no choice but to start taking advantage of this natural treasure trove. For example, as of 2025, there are already several operating hydropower plants with a capacity of more than 100 megawatts. However, despite this, China only utilizes 1.7% of Tibet's energy potential. But that's only for now, because the Chinese have set their sights on developing the area that offers the greatest potential of what can only be found in Tibet. If you look at a map, it's just a river. But in reality, it is a pure concentrate of natural power. The Yarlung Tsangpo begins on the Chemayungdung Glacier in southwestern Tibet and first flows eastward. Then the river makes a sharp turn, breaks the usual routes, and rushes through the Himalayas straight to the Indian Ocean. The origin in the high mountains, constant feeding from snow and glaciers, plus a very challenging terrain, all this turns the river into a natural turbine. The streams here don't just run, they rush downward with a thunderous rush, raising the spray miles upward. This is why the Yarlung Tsangpo River is one of the most powerful hydropower resources in the region. But we and the Chinese engineers are not interested in the river as a whole, but in the specific area where it runs. Yarlung Tsangpo Canyon in Medog County. Its second name is Yarlung Tsangpo Grand Canyon, and you know it came about for a reason. This canyon's considered one of the longest and deepest in the world. Its length is about 310 miles, and the depth in some places reaches more than 17,400 feet. According to other data, the canyon has places where the depth reaches 19,700 feet. This, by the way, makes it both longer and deeper than the Grand Canyon in the USA. That said, this is a real treasure for hydroelectric power. When the river enters the canyon, it's at an altitude of 9,500 feet. Then it runs 310 miles, and at the exit, it's at an altitude of 3,300 feet above sea level. So the elevation difference is about 6,200 feet, which allows to produce a huge amount of energy. However, the Chinese were interested in one particular section, the Big Bend. It stretches for only 31 miles, and it's here that the river drops almost 6,500 feet down. A site like this is a gift for any engineer dreaming of building a dream hydroelectric plant, and it's not surprising that it's here, in this inaccessible and harsh corner of Tibet, that China's going to undertake the construction of one of the most ambitious dams in history. No, not just China, the whole of humanity. The hydropower plant has been dubbed Midog or Motuo, and it's important to realize right away that the Chinese have planned to build not the conventional hydropower plant we're used to. According to limited public data, the new hydropower facility will block the river with a dam. That's pretty much expected. However, in order to make the most of the height difference, the Chinese have planned to drill through mountains. The project involves the construction of 4 main tunnels, each stretching approximately 12 miles. They'll pass under the Namcha Barwa complex, one of the highest and most complicated mountain systems in the region. Water will be channeled down through these tunnels, building up speed and pressure before entering the turbines to generate electricity. This approach maximizes the use of altitude differences and converts the water's energy potential into electricity at high efficiency. In addition, the tunnel system allows to regulate the flow, ensuring stable power generation regardless of weather conditions or changes in river levels. Remember when we talked about the Three Gorges, the most powerful hydroelectric power plant in the world, with a capacity of 22.5 gigawatts? Well, the Chinese are expected to get as much as 60 gigawatts from the new system thanks to the tunnel system. When it comes to the amount of energy, it's stated that the Midong hydropower plant will be capable of producing 300 billion kilowatt hours per year. For comparison, the same amount of energy is consumed by 27 million households in the UK. That is, one hydropower plant can supply energy to millions of local people. Yes, Tibet doesn't have that many people, but the energy could be transferred somewhere deeper into China. Well, they'll figure it out. Tunneling of such length and complexity in the conditions of the Tibetan Plateau is a colossal challenge. The geology of the area is characterized by unstable rocks, fractures, risk of landslides and earthquakes. The enormous altitude, harsh weather conditions, and inaccessibility of the area only add to these challenges. Work will have to be carried out in thin air, which increases the strain on personnel and equipment. But China has unique experience and technology for such tasks. The country widely uses modern tunnel boring machines, huge mechanisms capable of drilling through mountains with high speed and precision while simultaneously installing tunnel reinforcements. This experience has been accumulated in the construction of the most complex subway tunnels and transportation highways in China's megacities, as well as in other hydraulic engineering projects. In addition, the project is supported by the latest systems for monitoring the condition of rocks and engineering structures. Real-time sensors will allow detecting the slightest changes in the geological situation and promptly taking measures to prevent accidents. This will ensure safety both at the construction stage and in the subsequent operation of the plant. This level of technological integration makes the new hydropower plant a unique example of high-tech hydro construction. There's even a feeling that Chinese builders are people who are already prepared for the next most complicated megaproject of China. However, we'll look at yet another heroic deed of engineers later. And now we can say that because of its complexity, the new hydropower plant will be incredibly expensive. To understand just how much money the Chinese will have to invest, here's a great example. Slovakia's GDP in 2023 was $132 billion. According to the plan, the Midog hydropower plant translates to Slovakia's GDP plus $5 billion on top, which is $137 billion. Or 1 trillion yuan, so the number sounds even more impressive. By the way, according to current estimates, the new Chinese hydropower plant will be one of the most expensive energy projects in the world. The construction of the Midog hydropower plant was officially approved in December 2024. However, there is no publicly available data on the progress of works, but there is a date when power will start flowing to Chinese cities, 2033. Very ambitious given the scale and complexity of the construction, but China has already completed similar projects in a relatively short period of time, and the importance is incredibly high. The potential amount of energy is off the charts, which clearly appeals to the Chinese authorities. So the Chinese will probably do everything to complete the project as soon as possible. It's important to note that the Yarlung Tsangpo River has another name, Brahmaputra, which is Indian. The fact is that part of the Tibetan River runs just through the territory of India, namely the part that lies behind the Chinese hydroelectric megapower plant under construction. Overall, everything looks like a disaster for the country with New Delhi as its capital. First of all, let's face it, building in this location is a risky endeavor. Of course, we've already mentioned that there is seismic activity in the area, but here's an example to understand the scale of the problem. Tibet, with its many towering mountains, is the product of the Indian tectonic plate colliding with the Eurasian plate, and it'd be nice if this collision was a thing of the past. The plates are constantly moving, making the region one of the most seismically active in the world. Can you imagine the danger of building in the place chosen by the Chinese? Here's a very recent case in point. The January 7, 2025 magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck Tingri County, located in southeastern China's Tibet Autonomous Region. The result is 27,200 damaged buildings, 3,600 collapsed houses, and in some villages, 80 to 90% of the houses were completely destroyed. And that's just because of the earthquake alone. Obviously, the tunnels and the dam will be built bearing in mind that the region is seismically active. However, no one is immune to the fact that there will be an earthquake with such a large magnitude that the facility will be damaged. In the end, all this debris will flow downstream, straight to India. But that's not the worst of it. The greatest catastrophe will occur when the construction is already finished. The dam will block the water, thus creating a reservoir. If it's unable to hold the huge amount of water from the Yarlung Tsangpo River, a flood of enormous power will sweep away everything downstream. This would be destruction of colossal proportions. Also, the surrounding mountains are not a colossal concrete structure made by Chinese laborers. They're an assembly of rocks that have a life of their own, and each of them could fall off at any moment, especially if the magnitude of the earthquake is the same as in January 2025. As stated then, 5 sections of national and provincial roads were damaged by landslides and collapses, which is exactly what happens when chunks of mountains can't withstand the shaking. In certain situations, such an event could result in a dam being damaged and further a flood of water rushing into India. Well, you get the picture. However, India's frustration with the new Chinese hydroelectric megapower plant does not end here. When the Yarlung Tsangpo turns into the Brahmaputra and flows into Indian territory, its waters provide water for the Indian provinces of Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. There, the river provides drinking water for millions of people and waters rice paddies, orchards, and tea plantations. Its tributaries, the Subansiri, Lohit, Kemang, Manas, Dhansiri, and others, also spill over the fields during the monsoon season, infusing the land with moisture and fertility. At the same time, in dry months, the river plays the role of a life-giving channel. Even a slight weakening of the flow leads to water shortages in villages and towns. In Assam, for example, nearly 18 billion people depend on the Brahmaputra for a steady supply of water, and if the flow is reduced, many will be left without water or crops. But it could also happen that there's too much water. If China decides to release water during the low season, when there's not enough natural inflow within India, an artificial flood will begin, sweeping away bridges, roads, and homes. Flood control infrastructure is designed for natural water levels, but here the impact will come from a wave. Because of all this, every talk about controlling the Brahmaputra generates heated debate in India. Thousands of small farmers, fishermen, and entrepreneurs along the chain depend on the water level, flow rate, and sediment content of the river from the mountains. When they talk about the Midong hydropower plant, the question immediately arises, how much of the Brahmaputra's water even comes from China? One Assamese minister assures that the riverhead contributes only 30 to 35% of the total flow, with the rest coming from monsoon rains and tributaries within India. But even this 30% is a drop coming through a giant faucet. In the dry season, when the monsoons are delayed, China's share rises, the glaciers begin to melt, and if China delays runoff, India will be in trouble. Imagine this. It's a dry year, not a drop of rain. The river inland is almost dry, and suddenly China decides not to release the water. Fields are left without irrigation, and cities experience drinking water shortages. Even if in fact the 30% from the riverhead is reduced by 10%, it's enough to cause localized crises in Indian states. People in Arunachal Pradesh see the situation like this. A local farmer who has 2 paddy fields of 17 acres each waits for water to start sowing in June. If the Brahmaputra level is below normal, he loses a third of his crop. And selling rice at a low price after an inadequate harvest is a direct blow to his income. Still doesn't sound like a disaster? Well then, imagine there are several 100,000 such farmers. That's a big problem. And if water cuts are even bigger, the scale of the problem will multiply. In this case, the situation cannot be called by any other word but crisis. You know what else adds to India's fears? Negotiations are underway for any formal treaties on water flow, but there's still no paperwork. In this situation, if the hydropower plant already existed, the Chinese could regulate the runoff as they wish. There are no rights and responsibilities anyway. What's left for India to do? To maintain dialogue, build up its own water projects, and strengthen hydro operators in the foothills of the Himalayas. But each such project also costs a lot of money and draws protests from environmentalists who talk about destroying the last corners of the wild and from farmers worried about their future. One such project that's already rattling the brains of people is the Upper Siang hydropower plant. This is a dam that's planned to be located near the Sino-Indian border on the Yarlung-Tsangpo. The main purpose is to counteract the potential impact of the Chinese hydropower plant. The Indian dam is said to create a large reservoir that'll compensate for disruptions in the river's flow, which will protect against flash floods or water shortages. For example, if China decides to release the entire volume of water, the Indian dam will be able to contain that volume, protecting downstream areas. And if China releases just a little, the Indian dam will maintain normal year-round flow of the river, which will improve its availability, especially in the dry season. It seems to be a solution, but it also seems to be yet another threat for the lower part of the river. It's still a dam which will delay the flow and create many other problems. That's why people living downstream are protesting. 2 dams instead of 1? Sounds like a bad joke, despite the claimed protective purpose. All in all, the situation's as complicated as it could get, and it's a difficult task to solve. However, the Chinese are said to be building their dam already, so India, with its concerns, has less and less time to come up with something that works. Bangladesh can help with that. What does this country have to do with it? The thing is, it'll also have problems if all the concerns about the Medag hydropower plant are justified. The country is further down the Brahmaputra after India's Arunachal Pradesh and Assam, so reducing the flow will lead to exactly the same problems as for India: loss of agricultural land, lack of water for drinking, and everything else. However, Bangladesh may have an even bigger problem with this. Imagine the flow is reduced. Indian farmers try to take whatever's left upstream. How much water will reach Bangladesh? Probably very little. So this country will probably very soon become an important source of ideas needed to save it from the consequences brought by the Chinese hydropower plant.